Good morning. I am so proud to be here with my colleagues from the Democratic Women's Caucus, and we will be joined shortly, but grateful to Chair Teresa Fernandez for bringing us together today. So today we are here to talk about the SAVE Act. And once again, with this bill, Republicans have decided to prioritize themselves over the people they represent and the democracy they serve. Let's be clear up front. This is not about protecting our elections. Republicans aren't truly afraid of non-citizens voting, which we all know is already illegal, already grounds for deportation. They're afraid of women voting. And let's look at the past year. What has complete Republican control of Washington meant for women and girls? Attacks on childcare, attacks on our service women, tariffs on strollers and car seats and school supplies, cuts to food assistance, cuts to Medicaid, a program that pays for nearly half of all births in this country. They voted to criminalize OBGYNs and demonize pregnant women. They engineered an economy so disastrous for working moms that at least 450,000 women have left the workforce. But they still find time to cover up for Jeffrey Epstein's network of pedophiles. And now Republicans have realized they have a political problem on their hand. Looking at the latest Fox News poll, by a 10-point margin, women plan to vote for Democrats for Congress. So are the Republicans backtracking? Are they reaching out to women voters and saying, let's bring down the cost of childcare, let's reverse those premium hikes for health insurance? No. They've decided to make it harder for women to vote. They are trying to place more red tape, more paperwork, more bureaucracy between women and the ballot box, while they also will funnel all of our voter information to DHS. No guardrails, just straight into the hands of Kristi Noem. This is the playbook we have come to expect from this Republican Party. They make promises, they break those promises, and they try to hide from accountability by rigging elections. So we are here to say, as women of the Democratic Caucus, we are not going to let that happen. We are going to fight back here in the halls of Congress. We are going to fight back in the courts. And above all, we are going to keep fighting back out in our communities, where women and men are speaking up and making it clear. This is not an America we want. This isn't the economy we were promised. And this isn't the legacy that our children deserve. And with that, I would like to hand it over to the chairwoman of the Democratic Women's Caucus, Chairwoman Teresa Fernandez.
Thank you. Good morning, buenos dias. I'm Teresa Fernandez, chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus with my amazing colleagues. The Republican SAVE Act is voter suppression, plain and simple, and it will impact women the most. It's against the law for immigrants to vote. Immigrant voting is statistically meaningless. But what Republicans are afraid of is, as the whip noted, the women vote. Women have registered and voted at higher rates than men in every presidential election since 1980. Women vote because we want our families to afford groceries, to afford health care. We need to keep the heat on in the winter with those rising utility costs. Rather than earning women's vote by passing bills to make life more affordable, Republican solution is to blame immigrants and then pass a bill to make it harder for women and working people to vote. El SAVE Act republicano está diseñado para robar votos y afectará principalmente a las mujeres y nuestras comunidades trabajadoras. Muchas veces, los latinos usamos dos apellidos o nuestros documentos a veces no coinciden exactamente. Yo soy Teresa Ledger Lucero en algunos documentos y en otros Teresa Ledger Fernandez. Y con esta ley, los republicanos quieren quitarnos el derecho al voto solo por eso. Remember, the states already require voter ID. But this bill eliminates online registration. And in rural areas like the district I represent, women could be forced to drive 5 hours round trip just to vote. Working women can't afford to take that time off of work. And by the way, who's going to care for the kids while you're driving 5 hours to your county clerk's office? 69 million women in the United States who've changed their name after marriage do not have access to a birth certificate that matches their current legal name. If these women don't have access to a passport, and guess what? 50% of Americans don't have a passport, and it costs money to get a passport. And the Republicans' affidavit solution? It's not a solution. A real solution would eliminate the provision that requires women to go around and gather all these documents only to then affirm their own identity. The SAVE Act is meant to save Republicans' electoral butts come November because their policies are so unpopular. Remember, the SAVE Act is part of a larger attack on voting, where Trump wants Republicans to nationalize elections, and he plans on sending in gun-toting masked agents to threaten voters at the polls. The DWC is here to make sure women and all Americans know the truth. This bill will make it harder and more expensive for you to register and vote come November. Women had to march, protest, and starve ourselves to finally get the vote in 1920. We sure as hell are not going to let them take it away in 2026. I'll now turn it over to our amazing member and voting rights advocate, Teresa.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Sewell. I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District. It includes the historic cities of Birmingham and Montgomery and Tuscaloosa and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. I also am proud to serve as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Elections for the Committee on House Administration. In recent months, Donald Trump has made it clear that he will do whatever it takes to hold on to power, even if that means blocking millions of women from casting their vote. As we speak, his cronies are redrawing maps to benefit Republicans. His FBI is raiding election offices. He is threatening a federal overtake of our elections. And now his allies in Congress are trying to disenfranchise millions of eligible voters. Let us be clear. House Republicans say the SAVE Act is about voter ID. What the SAVE Act is really about is voter suppression. Voter suppression, plain and simple. This bill is so extreme that even driver's licenses would be insufficient to register to vote. Instead, Americans will be required to present their birth certificate or their passport. The reality is that 70 million women do not have names that match their birth certificate. Unless they have a passport, those women will be blocked from exercising their constitutional right to vote. That's unacceptable and un-American. The ability of voters to choose our leaders is foundational to our democracy. It is a freedom that generations of Americans fought, bled, and some even died for. Many in my hometown of Selma, Alabama. It is what safeguards the liberties that we as Americans hold dear. Today, that freedom is under assault, and we in the Democratic Women Caucus are not going to stand for it. We're going to fight back. Make no mistake, Republicans know that their policies are failing. Prices are going up, jobs are going away, health care is being slashed, and Americans are struggling to make ends meet. Republicans know that they cannot win on the merits, so rather than changing their policies, they are trying to change the rules. John Lewis didn't get bludgeoned on a bridge in Selma, so that Donald Trump and his cronies could destroy our democracy. John said, "The vote is sacred. The vote is precious. They wouldn't be going through all this trouble if they weren't trying to take it away from us. But we stand united. We stand united against this power grab, and we say no. We will continue to fight back. We will say no to the SAVE Act. We will say no to the MEGA Act. We will say no to the Save America Act, whatever they want to call it." The fact of the matter is that our democracy is under assault, and we as Democratic Women Caucus will not stand for it. With that, I'd like to bring up the DWC Vice Chair, Amelia Sykes from Ohio.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sewell. Good morning. I am Amelia Sykes. Good afternoon now, Congresswoman representing Ohio's 13th Congressional District and the Vice Chair, one of the Vice Chairs of the Democratic Women's Caucus. And I want to be very clear about what the SAVE Act actually does. This bill makes it harder for Americans to vote, period. And it does so by targeting women, whether Republicans want to believe it or acknowledge it or not. And here's why. In Ohio alone, more than 3.5 million women have or are married, and more than 3/4 of these women have changed their name when they married. Under the SAVE Act, if your current name does not exactly fit and match the name on your birth certificate or citizenship papers, you could be blocked from registering to vote, even if you are a lifelong naturalized or American-born citizen. That is a bureaucracy that's designed to trip people up and keep people from voting. In my state of Ohio, where we have some of the strictest voter ID laws, we have seen what happens when you implement them. The level of voter fraud is the same, but the amount of people who are not registered to vote increases substantially. The amount of voter fraud is sustained, but the amount of voter engagement decreases, and particularly amongst people of color, young folks, the disabled, and guess what? Women. This is not a design flaw, it is the purpose. And for the many women in this country who have desired and attempted to be compliant with the real ID, going to the DMV or the BMV or whatever your title bureau is, multiple times with birth certificates, passports, probate letters, marriage certificates to be turned away, that ID isn't even sufficient under this bill. And for women judging work, childcare, aging parents, or limited transportation, this is not a small hurdle. It is a wall, a barrier to keep us from voting. Older women are especially vulnerable. And Ohio has more than 2 million people over the age of 65. And the older your documents are, the harder they are to retrieve if they even exist at all. And women with disabilities, they are at risk too. Over 1.5 million Ohioans have a disability, and this bill offers vague promises instead of real accommodations allowing them to vote. So I'm going to say this plainly. The SAVE Act does not protect democracy. And I'll say it again in case you missed it. The SAVE Act does not protect democracy. It protects Republicans' malfeasance and terrible policymaking. It tells millions of women, married women, rural women, older women, disabled women, that their voices, our voices, do not matter. And the Democratic Women's Caucus will not accept that. We believe that every eligible voter deserves a clear, fair path to the ballot box and not political games dressed up as security. We urge our colleagues to reject the SAVE Act and stand with American women who have been keeping this democracy running. Thank you very much, and I am going to turn the program over to my colleague, Representative Becca Ballot from Vermont.
Thank you so much, Amelia. So I represent the state of Vermont, and before I was in Congress, I came up through my state Senate, and one of the things that we did in Vermont was make it possible for every eligible voter to vote, We were focused on rural areas, making sure that we had motor voter registration, making sure that we had absentee ballotism. That is what we should be doing right now, not making it harder for people in rural America to vote. And I want to thank everyone who's come before me because you're really hammering home the points here. This SAVE Act is going to make it more difficult for eligible voters to cast their vote in this country. It's not about undocumented immigrants. It's never been about undocumented immigrants. It's already against the law for undocumented immigrants to vote in this country. And we know that the number of people ineligible to vote who do vote, it's minuscule. You know who this bill punishes? It punishes Americans who don't have a passport, which obviously, let's connect the dots here. Those are often wealthier people, people with more means. Are we really wanting to make it more difficult for rural Americans to vote? It's also going to make it more difficult for women to vote, as my colleagues have said. It's going to make it more difficult for members of the LGBTQ community to vote. Because if your name on your birth certificate doesn't match your name that you registered to vote, you will be ineligible. This is about systematically removing people from the voter rolls, because this is not a voter ID bill. This is a registration bill. And this is what we have seen from this administration. How do we continue to carve people off of the voter rolls? Which is why Pam Bondi keeps insisting that Minnesota turns over their voter rolls. It was never about protecting the vote. It is about removing people from the voter rolls. The whole point of the democracy is to make it possible for people to vote, because it's the people who get to decide the policies. And Republicans talk nonstop about protecting women. And you'd think, if they really believe this, that this would be a non-starter for them, because it disenfranchises so many women. But as we have seen with the Epstein files over this past year, what they say and what they do are two different things. This is a moment when we must stand together, all people who believe in a free and fair democracy, regardless of political background, regardless of district. You need to be standing up for your voters. You need to make it possible for people to cast their ballot. Conservative women will be just as impacted by this as much as liberal women. That's the part they're not saying out loud. My Republican colleagues are making it seem that women generally will not be impacted by this. Conservative women are also going to have a hard time to vote. This serves no one except the men in power who want to retain their power. That's what this is about. With that, I will close and give the mic over to my great colleague, Congresswoman Hillary Scholten from Michigan's 3rd District, who is with me in the fight.
Thank you, Becca, and thanks to my colleagues in the Democratic Women's Caucus. I'm Congresswoman Hillary Scholten, proud to serve as vice chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus. We're here today because Republicans are once again trying to pass a bill that makes it harder for millions of women to exercise their constitutional right to vote. Let's be clear. Only United States citizens should be deciding our federal elections. Republicans are trying to sell the SAVE Act as a way to stop non-citizens from voting. But guess what? That's already the law of the land. What this bill really does is make it harder for citizens, especially women, to vote. As the first woman and first mother to represent Michigan's 3rd Congressional District in history, this issue is especially personal to me. Nearly 70 million married women in this country have changed their last name, but their birth certificates don't reflect that. In Michigan's 3rd District alone, 160,000 women could find themselves unable to register simply because when they got married, they didn't change both their ID and their birth certificate. 160,000 women in my district alone. A busy working mom, juggling jobs, kids, and everything else that life throws at her, shouldn't have to jump through bureaucratic hoops just to exercise her fundamental right to vote. Both tribal and military IDs would also no longer be valid forms of voter ID, which would put a huge burden on Native Americans and service members who would be required to submit sensitive military records just to cast a ballot. I want to be as straightforward with you all as possible. This bill does not support election security. It is all about voter suppression. It is not about left versus right. It's about whether we believe in a democracy where every eligible citizen can exercise the right that they have, that they already have, to cast a ballot. I stand with anyone, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, who believes that democracy works best when more voices are heard, not fewer. Now I turn it back over to the chair of our Democratic Women's Caucus to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing out that this is actually going to make it hard for military members, for tribal members. It's not just women. It's a large swath of Americans. Are there any questions?
Hi, yeah, so the version of the Save America Act that's going to be in front of the Rules Committee later today says that, states can allow people, married women, to, submit proof that they changed their name when they got married, but it doesn't really specify what that proof is. Are you concerned about this being put on the states, as well as the lack of specificity in what states will accept for the proof?
Well, exactly. The way to solve the issue of putting this extra burden on women who've changed the name is to remove that requirement. Don't go right there and say, oh, but we're going to let you do some kind of proof. Because remember what women are going to have to do. They're going to have to go and get that birth certificate, get that marriage certificate, get that divorce certificate, and then in the end, have to live up to some proof that we don't know what it is. And it can change depending on what jurisdiction you're in. Right now, states already require ID, but states decide whether you're in Ohio or whether you're in New Mexico, what constitutes acceptable ID, and people in those states know what they have to do. But right before an election, primaries are ongoing. What Republicans want to do is saying we're changing the rules. We're going to make it harder. We're going to make it more expensive. Oh, but we're going to give an out, which is not really an out. It's vague. We don't know what it's doing. It's because they realize that we have hit them hard on this and that women across the country are alarmed. Their solution does not erase the concern. Their solution is just another example of how this really isn't about women voting. This is about making it harder for everybody to vote. Does anybody else want to add?
I'm gonna weigh in just a second from a state like Michigan, where elections are a big deal, and we have in my district incredible voter turnout. There's so much wrong with this bill. It's hard to address it all in just this press conference. But you bring up another excellent point, which is the ambiguity that is in this version of the bill. Imagine you're on election day. You get up early. You try to be the first one at the polls, and only to realize there's already 30 people in front of you. You're trying to get to work, and the poll worker doesn't know which form of ID is acceptable to validate the name change that's in front of them. All those 30 people, waiting behind this individual are also going to be impacted. So the ripple effect, not just to the women who are targeted, but millions of other voters across the country who are going to be forced to wait in longer lines because of the ambiguity in this bill.
There's data from Pew Research that shows more than 80% of Americans support ID to vote. I know this is a registration bill that we're talking about, but I think that research still speaks to the idea that people want to see something done about election integrity. Mm-hmm. What's your message to maybe Americans in your party who, still want to see something done about voter registration?
Thank you for that question. There is not a state in this country that I know of that does not require identification in order to vote. And so the issue is not whether it's requiring identification, it's how difficult are you going to make that identification to obtain in order to vote. So if you need to show, in order to register, a birth certificate, your name that matches your current name, maybe address, maybe something else. In Ohio, for example, as I mentioned, the voter laws change every election cycle, and every time you go to vote, what you had before may not work. And that is a design feature. It is not a flaw to confuse people and to refuse and to allow many others not to vote when we want them to. And so I would say very briefly and directly, as I started the conversation, voter ID is required now. I don't disagree with that. But if you're making people produce passports, marriage licenses, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, and a bevy of other documents that are not readily available, that is not about voter ID. That is not about voter ID.
That's my question, though. What do you say to Americans, maybe even those in your party, who want to see more stringent rules around voting?
We have voter ID. Voters have to show ID in order to vote. And the states across this country have decided what is an acceptable form of ID. And voting has happened in this country for year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation, and we are increasingly seeing lower and lower amounts of voter fraud and ineligible voters voting because of the laws that we have, because we have designed the system to weed out people who are not supposed to vote. So we're not arguing that voter ID should not exist. It exists, and that is acceptable. We are just saying, don't keep adding more hurdles so fewer people vote simply because you cannot win based on the merits of your platform, and the only way you can win is by cheating. That answer your question?
Kind of.
I think it does answer your question. I think you don't want to accept it.
So when it comes to voter ID, aren't there some states where you can just provide like your address and that is that the ID?
I think the piece that is being lost in all of this conversation is that you cannot look at this bill without seeing it in the broader context of what the president has been saying for the last few weeks about nationalizing elections. That's why this is so terrifying. That we have a federal system in which states run their elections. And why is it important for states to run their elections? Because those local poll workers actually know those people who live in their district. They shop with them, their kids go to school together. And to have a president at the same time that they're pushing this agenda saying the future actually is about nationalizing elections, it's all part of the same issue. And so I think that's what you're hearing from all of us, the frustration. We have security in our elections. There is no such thing as rampant voter fraud in this country. It's a straw man. It falls apart every single time. So we have to continue to bring it back to that this is part of a broader conversation about not trusting states to run their own elections because the president didn't like the results of the 2020 election. That is what this is about.
And this will be the last question.
Hi. You have been talking about the impact on sort of states managing their own elections. Curious if you're hearing from, in your states, what it would take for the sort of election officials, Secretary of States, to have to implement the changes in this bill, like between now and the election in November, or even the primaries.
Right, and that was the point earlier. We already have primaries ongoing, right? And this is the problem is, I'm from New Mexico. We actually have great elections. They are certified. We have the Carter Center. We have all kinds of people looking. And we have across the United States. It has been determined that we have fair and free elections. So this is not about that. So when you ask somebody, do you think it's important to have voter ID? They're going to say yes. And then you say, these are all the IDs that are already required. It's like, well, that's good. But if you change the rules, somebody who has been voting their entire lifetime is going to show up.
That's right.
And they're not going to have what is now the Republicans have decided here in D.C. is required for every single state. That's precisely the problem. Because then you have the lines that the vice chair pointed at, right? That you have this ripple effect. Well, I didn't know I had to bring that. I've been voting all this time. Well, I didn't know I have to go that. And then you have to go back and redo it. I mean, that's the thing. And then you can't have, because it's not just voter ID. It's mail-in ballots. This law affects so many different aspects in its impact on rural voters, its impact on the military, its impact on women. It is across the board. They don't want working people to vote. They want to narrow the voting pool. when we should be about expanding it, because that's really what democracy is about. And so that's why we constantly want to bring you back to what is the purpose of democracy. Democracy should increase the people participating, because it is really a constitutional system that is based on the people retaining the power. But if you're constantly trying to remove the power of the people, then you're undermining our Constitution that we're supposed to be celebrating this year. And that's part of what we are about, is everything they're doing is undermining our constitutional system. And with that, thank you very, very much for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Great job.
Stephen, great meeting.
Nice to meet you. Just want to give you my sweater on.
Thank you.
Chat to follow up. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lizzie.